Welcome to Make It Pretty Please, the Design and Strategy podcast. Automotive projects don't start in a void. They start with a decision that locks in capital, resources, and brand direction for years. And yet, the most fundamental questions are often left unanswered. What do we want to achieve, and why? Just make it pretty, please. Any creative's nightmare briefing isn't direction, but a promise of problems ahead in the development process. This is what we talk about. Meaning and form, delivered through brand strategy and design direction in an automotive context. Each episode is structured like a strategic project meeting. One question, clear thinking, real exchange, and no decoration. Now, let's get into today's topic.
When a new product brief lands on your desk in the advanced design studio, you usually feel a tension. How can we as designers help the company make the right decisions? Previously, in this podcast, we spoke about other big questions. Why do we build this car at all? And what is this car supposed to do for our brand? Today, we want to focus on another important question. How do you grow a brand in this new era? Recent news about Porsche were the starting point for this episode. We've all heard about the shifts in the market, eroding corporate profits, particularly in the Chinese context. There's also a generational shift in leadership, and there are recent articles that start speculating about the future lineup and its constellations in Porsche's range. Wolfgang.
Hello, Felix. Interesting topic today. Porsche's lineup has been expanding steadily, especially in the electric era with the Taycan and the electric Macan, the electric version of the Cayenne. And as we know, more pieces don't automatically make the pie bigger. And today this question is really interesting. How can brands grow in this challenging new era with new rules? Does it really make sense to have separate models for electric and combustion engines in every segment? And how can we grow the brand? By growing a brand, we mean making more profit. So Felix, from your perspective, what came to mind when you read the article that Porsche thinks about merging the Panamera with the Taycan?
So many interesting things are going on at the moment. So I think this is one fascinating aspect to say, well, we have two models that somehow do similar things. Can we make one product out of this? The other question is also, how is the rest of the portfolio looking as well? Because everyone knows, as soon as you say the name Porsche, you have a mental image of the 911 in your mind. There's also recent news about creating a new halo car again, something positioned above the 911. So I think it's important to really check on all the information that has been in the press recently and to put it in context. That's my first take on it. The underlying sensation is, though, as we said, we're entering a new era. And I would say entering a new era for us means, in a certain sense, that the old recipes don't necessarily work. You know, the old recipe were, if we want to oversimplify, you have one market where you're successful, you expand because you go into another market where you will be successful. So you grow in this way, or you're a brand with one successful product and you go create a new product to add volume. These are the two basic recipes that have worked quite well for so many brands in the last, I'd say, 20, 30 years.
Yes, but let's sum up Porsche's problems first. They always had the 911 as the icon. Then they had the idea of the 911 basically transferred to other segments like the Panamera, the Cayenne, to tackle the sedan segment and the SUV segment. And those segments were the cash cows for the Porsche brand. And now we have a shift in one of the most important markets in China with the electrification. Suddenly Porsche is no longer automatically a leading performance brand. Other brands offer similar power, similar features at a significant lower cost, also with great design. The margins decrease because it's no longer enough anymore to have the Porsche badge and then expand it to other segments. The other problem is the transition of electric is a significant challenge for an emotional sports car brand like Porsche, how to transfer their DNA into the new era and bring the same excitement with the new models to the market as they did previously with the 911. What would you add from your perspective is the current challenge for Porsche?
You point to a number of very good things. So as we said, the 911 is the icon of the brand, but let's not forget that this was a decision as well. It wasn't always like this. So let's quickly go into this. The Porsche 911 has become an icon almost against the will of management at some point within Porsche. So that the Porsche 911, if you want to exaggerate, refused to die. The company had already decided to go into the 928, into the 944, which in many ways were superior products for the task given. But somehow there was something so strong in the 911 that became, through market forces in many ways, the reference from which all derived. And then, as you said, everything came from the idea of the 911. You applied it to a four-door architecture. This goes back to the 1980s and to the 1990s, by the way. This is not just the 2000s. And at the right point, the right products were added. So four-door architectures, four-door SUV architectures to expand this range. And it was hugely successful, so much so that this success is now turning into a problem, because when you're so successful like Porsche was, you get a lot of attention for your design language, for your tech. But let's focus on the design language for a second. It has become the benchmark for so many other product offerings, particularly in the Chinese domestic market. So that means that companies can not only reproduce the acceleration and the tech, they can also reproduce the proportions and the design language of Porsche. So because, ironically, Porsche has been so successful becoming a benchmark, because it's so ubiquitous now, this language, it has weakened, in a certain sense, Porsche's overall position. And that's a problem.
And I'd also add, from a brand strategic perspective, you said a very interesting remark that the 911 survived against the will of the company, or that it was driven by market demand rather than decisions from the company. And this shows how strong the essence of the 911 is. And when we look back why the Panamera and the Cayenne started in the first place, we have to also look at the 911 at that time. And the 911 back then, it was completely different to the 911 today. It was not the daily driver car. It was noisy, with enormous character, and it was basically a weekend car. And I've found in some research that the first idea to expand the 911 to the four-door segment with the 989 was Ferry Porsche's brief to build a Learjet for the street. So the idea was to make an everyday version, a daily driver of the 911, and the four doors were merely one of the features to make this happen. And today the 911 is a daily driver. It has changed. So the core idea of the Panamera is already fulfilled by the 911 itself.
That's an interesting point. I think you're right in saying that the car has grown up a lot. It has become a lot more civilized, and it caters to many more needs. Maybe in the earlier days, the car was noisier, but then again, so many other cars were also relatively noisier and harder to drive. But it is interesting when you read up some of the old stories, how much of a fuss it was to get power steering into the car rather than direct steering, because the purists, and there were already purists back in the days, were fighting against any sort of change. So Porsche has embraced that change, has made the car accessible to many new markets, to many new segments, to many new driver demographics, of course. So yes, the 911 is a success also because it has changed so much over these years.
Your remark with the power steering is correct, that they were fighting against everything that changed the car, but it also shows how strong the essence of the 911 is or was, and how emotionally important this was to the people and still is. I think the problem today is that Porsche has a little bit lost this essence, and that it has become a perfect version of a sports car, but it somehow disconnected itself from this magic the 911 at the end of the 80s had. This is the magic that kept the 911 alive against superior products like the 928 or the 944. And to have a perfect version of the 911, a technically perfect version of the 911, and expand it to all segments is obviously no longer enough, or it's no longer spreading the magic to all these segments and generating profit in the end. Because this is what the brand wants, to excite people and make them want and desire the car and ultimately pay more. Because as you said, they can now get the same designs from other brands at a fraction of the price, And this leads to the question, what is the magic about the 911 and how can it be rejuvenated in the new era?
I see that a bit differently. I think the 911 has become such a strong product and it has also quite a significant volume. And it's also a car that is very much still pure in a sense that it is a combustion engine car. It is still a 6-cylinder car. And there are many versions of it. So I think the problem is not the 911 as such. The problem is the product range where you are less unique. To put it more bluntly, nobody else can build a direct 911 competitor. There's many brands that try to go into this segment, and it's an amazing challenge because the 911 is so good at what it does. It's not perfect. If you wanted to build the perfect track machine, you'd probably do something else with the engine. We all know that. But there's something inherently very good about the 911. The problem is, I think, in the products where you do something else. So you could say the Panamera with its front engine architecture is in some ways the successor of the 928 for today's times. It is a more spacious thing. It's 4 seats, but also 4 doors. It is a high-speed universal tool with 4-wheel drive, but it's on a higher architecture. And so is the Cayenne. So you basically have products that other companies also are good at. And the best example, of course, the reason why these cars are so successful is because they can share components with other brands within the Volkswagen Group. So it already is a slightly less purist approach than the 911. Is that necessary? Absolutely, it is necessary. You can't do everything with the essential 911 and keep its purity. You need to step away from that. But that's the exception. The 911 is the exception of not only the brand, but almost of the auto industry. It's an exceptional product. The rest is to be reinvented every time there's a new cycle, every time the market turns, in my opinion.
My perspective on this is slightly different. I completely agree with you that you say the 911 is the core and then the successful story was to expand it to other segments. But I'd argue that the 911 has somehow lost its purity over the years. This is like the normal process in development. So you make a product better and better and better, and NVH has increased significantly. So you can talk now in the car when you drive fast. You can handle it in the rain. It's an easy everyday driver. You have to pay extra if you want to have a manual shift. So the standard version is a car that is easy to handle. It already delivers a softer version or the 928 or the first Panamera did. And you can also sit in a car for hours and drive thousands of kilometers in 1 or 2 days. So the 911 has already solved the problems of the Panamera and the Cayenne, which leads to the question, what can the Panamera or the Cayenne, what is there? Why? Which we have discussed in the first episode. What is the essence that they expand into their segments and why is it unique? And how can they find a unique way that cannot be just bluntly copied by another manufacturer who just takes the design and applies it to their product?
I see what you mean. I'm just saying that the biggest problem isn't the 911. Can you make different thoughts about or different conceptual thoughts about a 911-like platform? Can you make it lighter, smaller, maybe even less complex and therefore potentially more democratic, if you will? Yes, of course you can do that. But that's not the big problem. I think the big problem is, as you, I think, sketch out as well, what are the other products? How can you transfer this essence of Porsche without being linked slavishly only to the 911? Because I'm going to go 2 steps back, because if you look back to the beginning of the company's history, there were already attempts of doing other things. There were central engines, rear engines, a few more experiments fairly early on. And I think we also need to bring in the reasons behind these bigger cars in the portfolio. My argument is that Porsche has been uniquely successful, very differently from other manufacturers, in that they created new products, actually bigger, more spacious products, but they positioned them below the icon. In terms of price. So they always kept the iconic position, the 911 and its derivatives, above anything else. So they basically moved down markets through other architectures, at the same time giving them a lot of prestige nonetheless. But it's interesting to remember that the Cayenne is priced more cheaply, even though it's a much bigger car, than the 911. Most companies do the opposite. Most companies take the easy route and saying, I'm selling something bigger, therefore it's more expensive. Not so Porsche. So that's why I'm saying the 911 works, because it's really strategically positioned.
Yeah, the 911 works because it's the real thing. My perception is that the 911 has not only kept being the real thing, but now it's progressing towards being the only thing, because it solves the problems its siblings solved, because it's perfecting everything. All the issues it has, the engine is behind the rear axle. Okay, they have engineered this feeling out of the car. So this car is no longer a threat in the rain, or you have to no longer be Walter Röhrl to handle the car in the rain. Every 18-year-old beginner can drive this car without any danger and problems. This certainly shows how far the 911 has come as a product and how perfect it has become. And I'd argue that the magic of the 964 and all the generations before the 996, they were cars that were not accessible so easily for everyone. And its derivatives, the 928 and the Cayenne and the Panamera, made the idea of the 911 accessible to people who were not willing to forgive on comfort or to learn how to drive properly. They just wanted to sit in the car and then have the Porsche experience and have Porsche handed to them rather than earning it. And the moment the Porsche 911 became so perfect as a car, it has lost the magic that it had when it started, and it made the idea of the other cars obsolete.
I disagree with you on this. I don't think it made the other cars obsolete at all, but I completely agree with the fact that it moved on from people who were willing to make certain sacrifices, put their lives in danger with, let's think about the turbo models, for something that has become in spirit very close to the traditional grand touring car, something that originally Porsche only offered us, the 928. But let's move on to really the big problem. I would say, yes, the 911 has its problems. Yes, it has become a range within the range. It does so many things for so many people. But let's focus on the big problem. For me, the big problem is where Porsche isn't unique enough. And that is, to a certain degree, electric powertrains. There is strong competition there. Porsche is arguably extremely good at it, but maybe not unbeatably good at it. But it's also things about features, connectivity, all the things that new buyers take for granted, and that are not at all what a purist or someone who is willing to sacrifice comfort, acoustic levels like in the past. So think of your adaptive cruise control. If that is not a standard feature in a key market and you charge incredible money for it, of course there is the buyer will think twice. Like, what do I want from this car? And am I willing to pay 3, 4, 5 times more for the Porsche badge, the Porsche original, when paradoxically I can buy something that looks almost identical, as we've seen in the last few weeks? That is a problem.
That's completely right, that Porsche has become certainly more comparable in the new era. And then you start asking the question, why pay significant more money for the same features? But we're in an era where features can no longer differentiate brands. It's more about what the brand is about than to compare single features against each other, because the competition on features always leads to price competition in the end. So who can make the same for less? And this is not the route you want to choose in the new era. You have to be very clear what the brand is about. And this brings me back to what I've said before. Of course, the 911 did not make a Cayenne obsolete in terms of space for the family and kids, but the idea made it obsolete of the perfect 911. And I would say this is the reason why you become comparable, because then it's just a feature. Then I see, okay, I have no cruise control as a standard. Why pay for it? But this is only the case when you choose the product first and the brand second. And I would say Porsche still is the brand that is chosen first as a brand and then the product. But it has to sharpen its profile for the new era again, so that an electric Porsche is chosen brand first, product second, And then I see, okay, I want to have a Porsche, but let's see what's perfect for me. Okay, I have a family and 2 kids. Okay, I need more space. So the 911 is not the obvious solution, but I get the same idea in another car.
Granted, I do want to challenge you on it a little bit, because I think that this approach has worked really well for Porsche. It has been a brand first, product second category. The proof is clearly all the successful products that have come out in the last 30 years. Think of the Boxster moving down market. Think of the Macan. Think of the Cayenne. Think of all of these products. I'm convinced no one would buy them if it were not a Porsche. Maybe the Boxster, maybe the Cayman, but nobody would buy a mid-sized SUV of that type without the Porsche badge. So I think the brand is super important. And I also agree with you that what you call the feature-defined product is dead. I agree with you, because there's such a speed in the market. There's so much tech out there that no feature can remain unique for a very long time. And to stretch the point one more time, the 911 is so unique because no one else is crazy enough to put the engine in the back. That alone will create uniqueness. Now, the question is, how do you move on from this? Like, how do you get into a market where the classic expansion market doesn't work? You can't just add one more product, because the brand has grown a lot when you think about it. Maybe it's worth talking about numbers for a moment. Big picture wise, what we can see, roughly 1/3 is the
911.
That's significant. That it's bigger than any other badge, any other model position. And I think even if you combined the Panamera and the Taycan, one combustion only, the other one electric only, they don't get near enough to that 1/3 critical figure. While the SUVs, they're not exactly 1/3, of course, but they're a significant number. If you take all the SUVs combined, that's roughly half of your brand.
In Germany, I'm not so sure about the international markets, but we can take these numbers as a reference for this episode.
Sure.
Before I go into the numbers or the interpretation of the numbers, I just want to add a remark to what you said with nobody's crazy enough to build a car with a rear engine. To me, the engine is also just a feature. The 911 is bigger than its engine placement, and also Porsche is bigger than the 911. So we've been discussing this question in the very first episode. The product itself is just a tool for the brand, and the 911 appears to be the perfect tool for Porsche. And coming back to the numbers, 1/3 is significant for such an uncompromising model, in quotes. Because as you also said, that the SUVs, both of them, the Cayenne and the Macan, the compromised version of the 911, they have only half of the whole brand. The 911 isn't really a halo car in the sense that it is for very few. It is the backbone of the company for decades now, even commercially. And there are other 2 lines, the Taycan and the Panamera, they are declining.
You made a strong statement, and I disagree with it, because you said like the rear engine is just another feature. And I think that brings us to a big topic for the design strategy / product concept, because it's all about the packaging. You know, what the rear engine does, it creates, ironically, a lot of space between the wheels. So it creates a lot of space for rear passengers. It's a 2+2, almost a 4-seater. And that's part of its success, because it's a daily weapon. It has become something that you could probably always drive in a daily fashion if you had some crazy bone in you. But nowadays, it's really become almost a practical car. And the package is a magical thing of the 911. There's nothing like it. It has storage capability in the front, of course. You have a spacious cabin. It's comfortable to get in and out. That's not something that you can take for granted. And even companies that build a direct rival, think of Mercedes-Benz with their recent rival, the package isn't as good. It doesn't have as much usability as the 911. And that's why I think it is a special car. As quirky as it is, it has a unique package. And this leads me kind of to where I want to go in understanding a little bit the consequences of this discussion. How do we build new architectures from a design point of view that create new value for a brand? Because we've said the old recipe doesn't necessarily work. The market reacts to it for some reasons more than others, whether it's technical, price. I don't think design is the problem as such, but design needs to do something new to move the game on. But I would like to talk a little bit about the idea of the package. Because what made the Panamera a relatively difficult car from a design point of view is that it's a big car. It's a big engine. It's a big wheelbase. It has big doors, a big rear roof point. So it lost some of its natural sportiness simply because of its mass and size. And then when you look at the Taycan, especially as it was presented first as a concept vehicle, but even in production, which is remarkably close, the package was brilliant. All of a sudden you had a smaller footprint, something that is leaner, it's extraordinarily fast, it has incredible brake fade resistance, it's a properly thought through powertrain, and you can really fit 4 people into it. And that's something, in a way, that's as clever almost as a 911 package. And if we talk about what needs to happen to bring these 2 models together, for example, I would say, well, it's a package problem. Let's look into what you can do with packages and proportions in order to get to a product that makes sense.
Yes, that's a very interesting point. What would it change package-wise to merge a car that is significantly bigger and has a completely different technical structure and merge them together with a package that is at the moment almost seamless? How could that work? Or could it work at all? What are the constraints?
At the moment, you see almost 2 companies. Company A is the electric company building the Taycan, and Company B is the company building the Panamera. And there's almost no overlap between the 2. And it reminds me a little bit of the 928 and 911 days, where you basically had 2 different production lines, 2 logics, 2 different cylinders. One was water-cooled, the other one was air-cooled, completely different principles. One of the approaches that worked a little bit later on was to say, what can we make in common between the first water-cooled 911s and the Boxster? Front ends, interior parts, some of it more painful than other. But there was an understanding to say, we do not need to have 3 products made from 3 different production logics and 3 production lines with 3 different engines. We try to radically simplify it, boil it down to what's most interesting, and create very sharp product positioning. Because the Boxster was a 2-seater, because the Cayman was later on the focused driving machine, sacrificing the rear passenger, but putting the engine in a more central position, the 911 could become the more comfortable GT and slightly bigger tourer. Now, when you look at the situation with the 2 4-door cars, you could also say, well, you should probably start with the smaller package and see how much of it you can keep by putting a combustion engine back in. And this is, I think, a crucial question. How do you create a new platform that allows you to reintegrate combustion engines? What we've seen recently is actually just that. There's some companies decided to do 2. Mercedes is a good example, traditional S-Class and EQS. Porsche is a good example, Panamera and Taycan running in parallel. Other companies have decided to merge. So BMW with the new 5 Series, to take just one example, or the 7 Series, all powertrains go into the same factory, go into the same car. So from a diesel to a hybrid to a petrol to an electric car. And that does something to the package, as we know. You need to cram more things in. Now, of course, Porsche is not a high volume brand like BMW might be, but it would still be worth understanding how to get into this new challenge. Many companies, by the way, face this challenge. Interestingly, even the Chinese manufacturers were the first wave of electrification, hugely successful. Range anxiety still is an issue, and certain parts, even of the Chinese market, remain partially plug-in hybrid and combustion engine based, therefore. So there is a new need to rethink these platforms. The old approach was, let's take a petrol platform, put batteries in. It usually became higher, bigger. Now the new approach is, why not start with something that is already electrified and see if we can readapt it to something that is also combustion?
My perspective is that the whole idea of a plug-in, which is a compromise, each way you see it, completely runs against the brand's DNA. And it's a pain to think about how you can add something external that's not really planned to be there in the first place and transplant it in there. Then it's the question, for what sake? I mean, the next Taycan will have different features regarding the battery. So the battery technology has improved a lot since the last generation, and range anxiety is decreasing year by year. And the next Taycan will, in order to have let's say a 1,000 kilometer range, will have significantly better cards than the current version. So for me, the question would be, why then go plug-in at all? Maybe the idea of the Panamera is already outlived with the next generation of a Taycan, which is fully electric and has sufficient range and handles the idea of the 911 regarding noise and comfort better? Or what kind of engine would you put in? So the 6-cylinder Boxer engine doesn't fit in. What can you do? There's the 4-cylinder Boxer, the platform of the old Boxster and Cayman. We can use that or split it in half and have a 2-cylinder Boxer engine as a pure range extender. But this doesn't spark any excitement. It doesn't say, wow, I need this, I want this. I think the next Taycan may even render this question obsolete.
It's a fair question. And I don't have an answer. What I would propose at this point in the development process to use the power of design as a catalyst, where you say, we don't know yet what the right constellation is. We don't know yet whether it is that powertrain, that packaging. Is it cab forward? Is it cab rearwards? Is it a big engine? Is it a small engine? But we have the tools to explore these things. And we have the tools to explore these things quite efficiently nowadays, because you can illustrate these packages and look at them with the key decision makers really early in the process. So it could be as simple as building a number of virtual models, and people look at them with either 3D goggles or on a big screen to get a feeling of what the impact is on the proportions. Because ultimately, it needs to be an attractive proportion. It needs to be perfectly usable to make sense to many people. It needs to be attractive. There's no such thing as a good argument that makes something that is not intuitively attractive better. I can't think of any rational sports cars. They need to emotionally work. So I would really go quite wild. I would tap into the creativity of the engineering department, first of all, to say like, well, guys, you're the experts on this. Like, how do we get this amount of energy into this amount of drivetrain? Where would you need cooling air? Where do you need the engine? If it's flat, how flat can it be? Can we put it under the front trunk? Can we put it under the rear trunk? Can we put it under the rear seats? Can we use a smaller engine that has the power of a bigger engine? That's exciting to me to see, because it always affects the design expression. One, because it might stretch the wheelbase. Two, because it might do funny things with overhangs. It might make certain interior constellations very uncomfortable because your hip point becomes too high and your roofline on the exterior suffers, or your headroom on the interior suffers. It is also a problem of how do you feel inside a car when you have a very cramped front quarter and a very spacious rear, for example. You also don't feel like you're in the center of the vehicle. But design has all the tools to visualize this and to make this a first direct experience. Virtual models, real models, milled models, videos of these. And it allows you to at least eliminate certain things. So you basically start with the two bookends, probably. What if we went fully electric and we can take a number of radical decisions in the way Porsche did with the Taycan, in the way Tesla did with their original cars. And the other bookend is more or less, as we know, business as usual. But in between, there's so many other things you can do. I would be very excited to see if you can make the car smaller again and create a positive cycle by saying, because the car is smaller, because the car is lighter, it will be more performing, it will be more exciting again. And it might capture the original intention of Ferry Porsche's vision of the Learjet, something that is as exciting as a 911, but a lot more sophisticated for today.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Your approach, I would even go one step further back and think, what is a new successor of the Panamera or the Taycan? What is it about? What's the role of this car in the first place? Before I even think about what's inside the car, to even know the package, because Porsche is a leading brand. So to me, it's not enough to think about what can we do with things we have at hand, but where is this going? The Panamera was an incredibly successful concept for decades, and its success slowly comes to an end. But this is just a natural cycle of a product. What is a new cycle for a new product that can be successful for the next decades? So we need to know the role of the product first before we even think about how can this be packaged. And this also comes back to the 911. What is the role of the 911 in the new era as the backbone of the brand? Because we have the combustion engine. It's the holy grail for the enthusiasts. You cannot really touch it. This is completely okay, by the way, but you have to find a place, a territory for the 911 because it's the backbone of the brand, and then find territories for other products so that they can play their role. And we've seen this with the Taycan. When the Taycan was launched, it had this enormous acceleration. I think the Porsche 911 Turbo, it had 3.2 seconds acceleration, not 200, and the Taycan had to be 1/10 slower. And I think everybody knew that the Taycan could be faster than the 911, and it was not allowed to be faster than the 911 because it would, from a brand perspective, probably scratch the image of this icon. But this is not the way you can do things in this new era, because every model has played to its full strengths and you cannot step back in order to not harm the image of a sibling model.
These conversations don't end here. Where is strategy and design breaking down for you right now? What's slowing down your team or creating friction? Chances are it's at the intersection of strategy and design. We're here to help, analytically and confidentially. Contact us at makeitprettyplease.com. That's make-it-pretty-please.com.
I see what you mean. It does sound a little defensive, as you say. I don't think that when the briefing was done for the 928, I don't think that the briefing was be slower than the 911. I think there were different times, I think, yes, I agree with you. You need to be a lot more bold and always beat your previous records in a way. It might not always be relevant because we're probably also reaching the fastest accelerating numbers that the human body can endure, or what is safe to handle in a public road scenario. But the spirit, I think, is right. You need to really give these products a leading role. I'm fascinated by what you said about this play between defining what the mission of the product is and looking at the package that can fulfill that promise. And I think that's a very valid approach to say, we want to define a world where these models have these roles, and we'll find the architecture. I think design is a good partner in this, to illustrate these approaches. But design can always look at things without knowing all of this. And this is sometimes the other magical moment when you, quite concrete, when you actually see what can I do with this? When you, without thinking too much, play with your Lego bricks and you say, but hold on a second, these two things fit together in an interesting way. And this is where the designer and the engineer are somehow quite related, because sometimes an unexpected combination leads to something new. And this is the moment when the what if model comes out. And no one really asked design to do exactly that, but enough people were like, hold on a sec, this is interesting. Let's explore. So I think you need both. You need a very, very strong strategic logic saying, yes, this and that, and not this, but that, in case this. But it doesn't always get you where you want to go, because you might stand in your own way, because you're based ultimately on data, on retrospective data.
I'm with you regarding the design, having the freedom to explore things without any constraints at all, saving the what if moment and to have no limitations at the beginning. And at the same time, the strategy can be, or it has to be, because this is a business with so much money involved, you have to have a plan to have at least an idea what's the role of these products to fully play to the strengths of the brand. What is the brand about? The brand is the key to all of this, and design is one of the most powerful tools of the brand because it brings the brand to life. But in order to bring it to life, you have to know what the brand is about. So the models, they're basically just tools, and so is design. It's making the brand visible and tangible.
Sure. Just to be precise, because I think it's not interesting to do design without any constraints, especially not in an advanced design context. I think there is a place for free design, just like there is a place for free architectural exploration. But I think what we're talking about here in an advanced concept is actually to really embrace the constraints and do something probably unexpected with it. Very often it's what I meant by playing Tetris with the engineers, is to take these constraints and really run with them and go to the ultimate consequence of but if this is that, then maybe we need to change that. How about if we did that? To really go into the stance where you all of a sudden, maybe some places fall and create more space or less mass or a new constellation. So design can perform the best when there is a lot of constraints, but when you have engineering partners and development partners in the larger sense, that are willing to dance a little bit. Because if everyone is like super rigid about everything that needs to be done, no movement can happen. And that's the irony of it. You need the constraints, but you need the wiggle room to play with the constraints.
This brings me back to the brand. Different departments can play together when they are aligned, and the alignment is the brand. And then you don't have to approach each other and say, hey, let's figure this problem out, when you know what your brand is about and what you're solving with your brand, why you are here in the first place. And then you have all the Tetris pieces, you know what they are, you know what you want, what is not working for the brand. And you have a crystal clear picture what is possible and what shouldn't be possible and what is off limits. And then you have your playing field for the design, and you can excel with your expertise in design, and the engineers can excel with their expertise in their engineering and technological platforms, and nobody will come up with things that are odd in the picture of the brand. We've somehow drifted off our question how to grow a brand, but at the core, this is the answer. To have a clear picture of the brand, and then you can expand it to different segments, to any segment really. You can test this with advanced design. You can show the what if moments and decide with concrete pictures and experience what this would be like, what this would look like with new technology in 3D and augmented reality. Then you can decide where the brand is headed or where it isn't headed, but it's no longer starting with the product. How can we make this better or make it faster, more powerful, more beautiful? This is definitely over.
Now, looking back over these thoughts, what are the most important insights? What key points can we take away from today's encounter?
I think it's really about what design can provide in this phase. How can we grow a brand in an early phase, in this advanced design phase, is really helping improve the decisional quality, to really show quite transparently what works and what doesn't work. Because ultimately, the most expensive thing is when you take a decision and then you need to take that decision again because it was the wrong decision or because it wasn't good enough, it wasn't deep enough. And then you react and then you lose time. So it is really about decisional quality, I would say. And how do you grow a brand in these difficult times? Ironically, for me, discussing all of these things with you today might also mean reducing certain things, reducing the complexity of your portfolio, making more out of less. I know that sounds like a stereotype, but you probably really need to focus on fewer things and make those stronger.
Yes. And since this is a design strategy podcast, I also want to say, how can design become more powerful in this? Because this new era, it's certainly more challenging than ever. And design is such a powerful tool. My impression is that most designers don't know how powerful they can be when they work strategically, because a designer is bringing the brand to life. When you design a car, you take all these thousands of decisions how to visualize this brand, what this brand stands for. With every line, you bring this brand to life. And you have to take these decisions one way or another. Either you have the strategy or the strategic understanding of the brand and have the foundation to do it, or you just do it in a free climbing style. And you're at the mercy then of the decision makers or marketing and sales who say, okay, this looks better for us or this doesn't work for us because. But if you have the strategy from the very beginning and it's not rooted only in aesthetics, but it's rooted in a common understanding of the brand with product and marketing, then you have a completely different role, because then you are a strategic player and you have the tools at hand. You don't have to ask someone to visualize it or to bring it to life. You can show it.
Very, very good point. And I think you're touching upon something interesting, the education also of the next generation of designers. Like, strategy is not necessarily something that is taught in design education classically. Just like there's very little management classes offered in most design education courses. And I think this is something where the design department needs to grow to offer more strategic support on this, because it is about trust. So of course, we have the tools as designers. We can use them actually more effectively than ever. But exactly because you have such tools that can be faster, more reactive, you need to understand more clearly what is the job at hand. So you need strategic training, absolutely. And also your role changes a little bit. Once again, you go away from generating many proposals from which to choose to becoming an editor or filtering things to go into the right direction.
Yeah, you're stepping up to a direction role or becoming a curator of ideas. And to me, from my perspective, strategy is like engineering for a designer. You've talked a lot about package today in this episode. You have to know the basic functions of the engine and its requirements to make it work, to give your design the justification. And it's the same with strategy. It's not possible to be 100% expert in engineering, design, and strategy at the same time. But there has to be the awareness that strategy can accelerate your design, just like the technological knowledge can accelerate the relevance of your design when you bring designs that work and are not problematic from a technological perspective or just don't fit the platform or whatever. This is exactly the same with strategy. If you have a design that looks great and it's awesome aesthetics, but it's pointless from a brand perspective, it's just the same with the engineering.
That would be another interesting discussion for a future episode, because I do look at it in a similar fashion. Of course, strategy is a key partner to the design department. The more clarity you have amongst the partners about the general direction, the more these individual departments can excel. And they will never do the same thing anyway, because their expertise in slightly different fields. Strategy can create a stronger alignment across departments than design alone could provide. The risk is always that design is seen as, oh, this is just the aesthetics, this is just the surface. Design today is much more than just the first layer, because the customer experience is everything, essentially. And design needs to build that customer experience more so than any other single department. And of course, that means talking to many more people. Strategies as a function in a company is a key help for the design department to get this sort of general alignment anchored into the project premises.
Definitely. And you said before that design thrives on constraints, or when you know the constraints. And I'd also say that strategy is often seen as a constraint or as a limitation, but then it's a strategy that is not really working. An ideal strategy would be an inspiration for a designer, and it would spark many more ideas, but in a direction that is aligned with the brand. And this is my take on the strategic role.
I think any designer is happy to have a clear vision of where to go. Anyone is then motivated to explore that future path.
Yes. Okay, so what have we learned today, Felix?
I would say tricky times ahead. Less is more. And also a needed optimism, a needed belief in what your brand stands for, and not being afraid of not being able to deliver it in the future.
I think we have this impression that right now the legacy brands, they're kind of backed in a corner a little bit, and that their role is outdated or that their power is declining. But I think we need to realize that these brands were about much more than their features. And a feature for me is also the 6-cylinder Boxer engine in the rear. It's also, we've discussed this. So Porsche is much more than its Boxer engine. And once you have this essence and you know what it is really is about beyond technology, then you can play to its full strengths again in any era and deliver it in any package and in any segment.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you, Felix. Do you want to say it, or do I have to say it? Until next time.
You say it. Until next time.
See you next time. And until then, make it pretty, please.
That's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, hey, spread the word and share it with others. You can find us on LinkedIn, on your favorite podcast channels, or on makeitprettyplease.com. That's make-it-pretty-please.com. Until next time.